The beggar who found true love. James was born into a wealthy family in a large city in Africa. He lived in a grand house, wore expensive clothes, and had the best of everything. People admired him for his wealth, and he had many friends, but he often felt lonely. The more he had, the more he realized that something was missing in his life. James wanted to find someone who loved him, not for his money, but for who he truly was. He had dated many women, but they always seemed interested in his wealth. They liked the fancy cars he drove, the luxurious parties he attended, and the gifts he gave them. But none of them seemed to care about his feelings, dreams, or what was in his heart. One day, while sitting alone in his expensive car, James made a decision. He would give up his wealth and live as a beggar to see if anyone would love him for himself. He wanted to find someone who saw beyond the money, someone who would love him for his true self. The next morning, James sold all his cars, gave away his clothes, and withdrew all his money from the bank. He then bought old, worn-out clothes and walked out into the streets. No one knew him as the rich young man he once was. He had decided to become a beggar. James sat on the street corner, his head bowed, with a cup in front of him for people to give him coins. He looked dirty and tired, hoping that someone would look at him and see beyond his appearance. Days passed, and the street was full of people walking by without paying him much attention. Some gave him a coin, some ignored him, and others looked at him with pity. But James didn't mind. He was determined to find out if anyone would love him for who he truly was. One evening, as the sun was setting, a young woman named Sarah walked by. She noticed James sitting on the ground, his clothes torn and his face tired. Unlike most people, she didn't avoid him or look away. She stopped and looked at him with kindness in her eyes. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked softly. James looked up surprised. He had been ignored by so many people, and no one had ever spoken to him like that before. He smiled and said, "I'm fine. Just a bit tired, but thank you for asking." Sarah sat down beside him. She didn't seem to mind his ragged clothes or the fact that he was a beggar. They began talking, and James told her about his life, how he had everything but still felt empty. He told her that he had given up his wealth to find someone who would care for him, not because of what he had, but because of who he was. Sarah listened carefully, not judging him. She shared her own story too, how she worked hard every day to support her family and never cared about money. She valued kindness, honesty, and love above all else. For the first time in a long while, James felt at peace. He realized that Sarah was different from the others. She didn't see him as a rich man, but as a person. They spent hours talking, laughing, and sharing their thoughts. Sarah visited him every day, bringing food and water, and soon they became good friends. As the days passed, James realized that he was falling in love with Sarah. She had a beautiful heart, and she cared about him for who he was, not for what he owned. He also noticed that Sarah was beginning to care for him in ways that no one ever had before. She worried about him when he was sick, and she celebrated his little successes. One day, James decided it was time to tell her the truth. He no longer wanted to live as a beggar, but he didn't want to lose Sarah either. He was scared she might leave him if she knew who he really was. "Sarah," James said, "there's something I need to tell you. I'm not really a beggar. I am James, the rich young man from the big house. I gave up my wealth to find someone who would love me for who I truly am. And in you, I've found that person." Sarah looked at him, her eyes soft with understanding. "I already knew, James," she said with a smile. "It doesn't matter to me if you're rich or poor. What matters is that you're kind and real. You're the same person whether you have money or not." James felt a great weight lift from his heart. He had found someone who truly loved him, not because of his money, but because of who he was. In time, James and Sarah built a life together. James learned that love is not about wealth or appearances, but about kindness, honesty, and caring for one another. He never went back to his life of luxury, but he didn't mind. He had found something far more precious than gold, true love. And in the end, James realized that the greatest treasure in life is the love we give and receive, not the wealth we accumulate.